Was this episode worth waiting 8 years? Solo Leveling came out back in 2016 as a webcomic, and ever since then, it's been one of the most highly requested series for any channel to react to for years. So when the anime dropped, it was only natural that I check it out since I never got the chance to follow the webcomic. Weirdly enough, it seems like a lot of people thought this episode was boring, which is concerning considering this season will only be 12 episodes. So if the anime can't hook people this season, then it'll kind of kill all of the hype for this series. Thankfully, I can safely tell you that episode 1 and onward is much better than people are making it out to be. As a matter of fact, the anime is so good that it's actually much better than the webcomic. So in this video, I'd like to share my first impressions as a new fan, explain why the anime may have already ruined the webcomic, and discuss whether Solo Leveling is really worth watching. And in case it isn't abundantly clear, this video will contain some major spoilers. Now thankfully, when I started this anime, I had zero context. I never watched the reaction streams and I made sure to avoid any spoilers, which is exactly how you should go into it. Episode 1 starts on a weirdly vague note. You see these soldiers surrounding an island and you know the anime is called Solo Leveling, so you're like, okay, maybe this is like a Call of Duty game and we're about to see the main character flex his video game skills or something. But then these weird bugs come out and you're like, okay, so maybe this is some weird modern take on Monster Hunter. And then the hunters come out and you're like, I'm starting to think this might not be a video game. And then of course there's a big fight and it's revealed that in this world, magical creatures invade from another dimension and now humans can gain different ranks of magical powers. Admittedly, this was a very weird way to open the anime, especially if you're a fan of the webcomic. But in retrospect, this was actually really smart. It got me to think about this world right away to a point where once I figured it out, I was already kind of invested. It's like, oh, so this is real life, like this isn't just another video game anime. In this way, Solo Leveling sets itself apart right away. From this point, we start with what is the prologue in the webcomic, and we're introduced to our main character, Sung Jinwoo. And from here, we can kind of see where this episode loses people. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So the rest of the episode is mostly low stakes. They explain the different ranks, expand on the world building, show us Sung's family and his motivation, and then we see his party clear a low-level dungeon. It does end on an intense note with the party getting trapped in a new dungeon and seemingly about to be wiped out. But we only get a hint of that and it's at the very end of the episode. Thankfully, episode 2 has way more action and it's almost night and day compared to episode 1. Episode 2 is intense from beginning to end. It's got these god-tier enemies as opposed to the mobs that we get in episode 1. It's got an interesting dungeon challenge that the characters have to solve step by step. And it adds a unique plot twist at the end of the episode which sells you on the show. Admittedly, I was somewhat iffy on episode 1, but by the end of episode 2 I was sold. I started to see why the series was so hyped up, and it's because of the kind of action you get to see. Whereas in episode 1, while they do a great job setting everything up, it's not nearly as exciting or intense. So understandably, a lot of people don't like episode 1 because it's pretty boring. It's a lot of world building, and then when it isn't, it's just the characters clearing a low-level dungeon. A lot of people think Solo Leveling would do a better job of hooking people if it got a 1-hour premiere like Frieren, but I think that's completely unnecessary. First of all, I think people are just saying that because it's Frieren and we all love Frieren. So it's like, oh well, Frieren did it, so everyone should do it. I think the whole 1-hour episode thing only works for certain kinds of anime. On the one hand, you can sell it as, oh man, you gotta watch episode 1, there's so much that happens, I can't wait to watch this anime. But on the other hand, if you're already someone who has to make the time just to watch anime, it's gonna be a hard sell if someone tells you that you have to clear an hour of your time to watch the first episode. All I'm saying is this whole 1-hour thing is generally a good idea, but I don't think it would magically solve the problem of episode 1. I am personally of the opinion that if you do not like episode 1, then you're probably not going to be a huge fan of Solo Leveling in general. Plus, let's be honest, if you already have a bunch of people saying episode 1 is boring, but you know the series is good, and you know it's only going to be 12 episodes, put yourself in the shoes of someone who just likes to wait and binge most anime. guess what? You're just gonna binge the season when it ends anyway. So there's no point in making an hour-long first episode when a large share of people are just gonna binge the 12 episodes in one sitting. Naturally, there's a legitimate question of whether it's worth following Solo Leveling on a weekly basis, or if you should just wait to binge it. I think most people are probably just gonna wait, but if you're a fan of the webcomic, then obviously you're gonna want to see this anime. Especially when you've been waiting for what feels like a decade to see everything animated. Which brings us to the other question of how the anime compares to the webcomic. Thankfully, I already owned a physical copy of Volume 1, which funny enough perfectly aligns with the first 3 episodes that I had just watched. So when I watched the anime and then I heard that people didn't like episode 1, I went ahead and read the webcomic to see why this might be the case. And having just read the webcomic, I can tell you that I like episode 1 even more now. The prologue is pretty bare bones compared to the anime. First of all, like I said before, the webcomic just opens with the introduction to Sung's party, whereas the anime opens with that big intense battle. So if anything, episode 1 is comparatively more exciting than the prologue. Second, there is a ton more content in these first 2 episodes than there is in the entire first volume. We obviously see a bunch from the Hunters Guilds. We see a bunch of the Hunter Association, which I don't know about you guys, but is pretty on the nose if you ask me. We also get to actually see Sung's mother in the anime, and we see more of his sister as well as the character of Cha-Hain. There's just way more content in the anime, and it all does a phenomenal job of setting up the world and developing Sung's character and motivation. And then you read the webcomic, and you don't get nearly as much, and it just opens with the party clearing the low-level dungeon. So already the anime is kinda looking like the better alternative. There's also some stylistic advantages to the anime. In the webcomic, there's a lot of goofy reaction faces that are more typical of comics, whereas in the anime, there isn't really any of that. While it makes the anime seem more down-to-earth and less cartoony, it also sets a much more serious tone, which helps to emphasize the action that is in episode 1. Plus, I don't know about you guys, but I think the anime looks way better than the webcomic. To be fair, the webcomic looks really good, the coloring is gorgeous, and I really like the character expressions. Plus, for a webcomic, they do a fairly good job of expressing movement in the actions. However, this is a webcomic, and to be honest, the paneling is really nothing special. Meanwhile, the anime is just as good looking as the webcomic, as it's pretty faithful to the source material. Plus, the animation is gorgeous. I mean, no disrespect to the webcomic, but when you have A1 Pictures animating this, the anime is gonna look way better. Which is just another reason why the anime is kinda just the all-around better version of this story. On that note, I think we can finally answer our 2 big questions. First of all, the anime is clearly better than the webcomic. The webcomic definitely has its own charm, but the anime adds so much more, and just looks so much better. It's to the point where I'm curious whether they'll keep this up in later episodes, because I'm not gonna lie, if they do this right, it might actually kill the webcomic. Granted, people who like the anime are still gonna want to read the webcomic. But like I said, as a new fan, I definitely felt like I was missing something when I read the webcomic after the anime. That only leaves one question. Was this worth the nearly decade-long wait? In other words, is Solo Leveling worth the hype? In my opinion, yeah. Solo Leveling is a lot of fun so far, and I'm curious to see what they do with this story. On that note, I'm also curious to see what kind of influence the anime has. Like I said before, with how people are and the way people are already talking about episode 1, I do think people are gonna sleep on this anime while it's still airing. I don't think we're gonna see the full potential of this show's popularity until after the end of season 1. Even then, I still have a small concern. If people didn't like episode 1 because it was too slow, then I'm concerned as to how much they can fit into this season when it's only going to be 12 episodes. It raises a legitimate question of whether people will even want to watch this season after it ends. But for now, it's definitely worth watching. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think of Solo Leveling? Which version do you like better? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my recent video on Kagurabachi. In that video, I explain why Kagurabachi will be the next Demon Slayer. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.